Welcome back, everyone. For today's video, we are going to be taking a look at the first round of the New York Labor Day Invitational Tournament being held in New York City. Now, Levy Rozman, the famous YouTuber and aspiring Grandmaster, is competing in the Grandmaster A section. He's trying to get his first Grandmaster norm, and he's starting off the tournament with a very tough pairing, playing against Jurabek Kamrulakov from, I believe, Uzbekistan, who is rated 2494 and is a Grandmaster. All right, Levy with the white pieces, and let's jump right into the action. So the game starts with the move c4 here, and after we get the move c4, now we have the move e6 being played. Levy plays knight c3, we get d5, and now we have the move e3. Here, Jurabek plays the move knight f6, and now we get the move knight f3, and we have the move bishop d6. Now, thus far, this is all pretty standard. It's very flexible system that Levy has played here with the white pieces. He has the potential to play d4. He can also play b3 and bishop b2, or down the road, maybe he can even trade the pawns here and play g3 and go for the fianchetto on g2. So one of the great things about the system is that white has a lot of flexibility. Now, you will probably have noticed the famous streamer, Grandmaster Hikaru Nakamura, has also played similar systems a lot in online games, and I actually play this for the exact same reason, which is there is a lot of flexibility and your opponent doesn't have a hard set idea or setup against it. So, Levy decides to play the move b3, we get the move b6, we have takes, and now we get the move g3. Now, what Levy is trying to do here is he's trying to fianchetto the bishop to g2 to pressure the pawn on d5. Jurabek plays bishop b7 here, and now Levy goes bishop g2. Now, keep in mind, in these positions, one of the very effective setups that Black has here is to play something like a6, bishop g2, bishop b7, and after white tries to castle here, Black can play knight d7, d4, queen to e7, and after, say, bishop b2 and knight e4, Black tries to castle the king to the queen side and start pushing the pawns very quickly on the king side. Instead, we get this move, bishop b7, Levy goes bishop g2, we got the move knight bd7, castles, and now we have the move a6. Now, the reason that Jurabek plays a6 here is that he has this very nice wooden shield, the bishop on d6 in this position, and he doesn't ever want to let white play knight b5 to kick the bishop away. So we get a6, Levy goes bishop b2, we get the move castles, and now we have the move rook c1. Here we get the move rook to e8, and now Levy plays this move rook to e1. Now, when Levy plays rook e1, both sides have more or less finished their development here. The only question really remaining for Levy is whether he's going to push this pawn to d4 or leave this pawn on d2, or maybe push it to d3. You either push a pawn to d4 or d3, or you leave it at home on d2. So here, Jurabek plays knight e5, and now Levy trades the knights. Now, you're probably thinking, well, this is why Levy should have played d4 to stop Black from putting the knight on e5, but Levy has a different idea in mind, which is to play the move queen c2. Here we get this move queen to d7, and now Levy plays the move f4, attacking this bishop on e5. Now, this idea might look a little bit unusual, but Levy is going to follow it up with a very concrete idea, which is that after bishop to d6, he now moves the knight to e2. Now, if this were a blitz game, I would say doing commentary, I'd probably say, I think this position should be better for me, assuming I'm playing with the white pieces, because when you look at the position, Black has a couple of issues here. The first big issue is that white is threatening to take this knight on f6 here and ruin the Black pawns on the king side. So, the reason I would probably say I think white is better is that the initial move that you would think is bishop e7 to guard against the capture, but now white has the move queen takes pawn, and white will win the game. So you can't move the bishop back to guard the knight. If you move the rook to e6, you now walk into bishop to h3, winning the rook or the queen on the diagonal. And if you move the knight to, let's just say, e4 here, for example, white has a very tricky idea with bishop to e5 here, because after takes, now the pawn on c7 is very weak once again, and after c5, I believe white can play d3, knight g5, and now the move d4, and white has a slight advantage in the center of the board with this pawn triangle, and you can also go knight to f4 here to try and target the pawn on d5. So, it's looking very good for Levy. I actually really like the position. However, his opponent is a very experienced player. He is a grandmaster, and he plays this great move c5. Now, on first glance, this looks like a terrible, terrible move, because now Levy can trade the bishop for the knight. However, in this position, Black is actually doing reasonably well, because even though the kingside pawns are kind of crippled here, white struggles to do anything in the center of the board. Now, if I could go back just for a second and set up the position with the pawn on f2, for example, say you get, I don't know, let me just move the pawn to h3 and c5 being played here. White is actually a little bit better here, because with the pawn on f2, white can play d4 to challenge the center of the board. Let's just say Black goes rook c8 and you play a move like queen d2. Now there's all kinds of pressure towards the pawns on c5 and d5 as well, and white is simply better. But when we look at the actual game position now, after takes, white cannot play d4 in this position because then your pawn on e3 would hang. So because the white pawn is on f4 and not f2 here, black is doing quite well since white can't really challenge the center with these pawns. The pawns are pretty much glued to the d2 and e3 squares, and additionally, white really struggles here. If you could somehow get some extra moves in, like, say, h3, g4, knight g3, with knight h5 or knight f5, white would be better here, but it's going to take a lot of time. I basically played 3 to 4 moves without giving black any constructive moves in return. So, after g takes f6, Levy decides to play the move knight to c3, and this is the first step in the wrong direction, but knight c3 is the most natural move in the position, and when I was actually watching the game live, this is the move that I expected Levy to play, because it puts pressure on the pawn on d5, and you can maybe go d4, maybe queen d3, and it just looks very natural, whereas, say, a slower idea like h3, it's going to take a lot of time. Black can also play f5 here, stopping the pushes to either g4 or e4, and one other very important point here is that if you were to play a move like king f1 and f5, there is always this idea with bishop h3 to target the pawn on f5. So it's very hard to come up with a plan. Computer, of course, says white should play king f2 and white is better. Those of us who live in reality as human beings, this is simply not a move that would be played. So we get knight c3. Here we have bishop f8 being played by Djurubek to guard the pawn on d5 from being captured. Levy plays the move e4, and now we get pawn takes pawn. Now, e4 is a move that I really hated as I was watching the game, and after this move was played, it became very clear to me the position was going the wrong direction, and it would simply be easier to play for black. Now, probably the biggest theme we're going to see in this game as we head further into it is the notion, if we ignore the evaluation bar, of whose moves or ideas are simpler in such a position. So, when we look at this position, Levy goes e4 here, he forces black to have to take the pawn. If black were to play the move d4 here, white can play many moves. Queen d3 is a top computer move, but even this move knight to d5, white is simply a little bit better here in this position because of the double pawns. White can play bishop to e4, creating a wooden shield and all kinds of targets on the king side, and as such, a grandmaster will never play the move d4. So we got pawn takes pawn, and now Levy plays the move bishop takes pawn. Now, when I talk about easier moves, what I mean by that is that in this position, let's say white takes on e4 and we get bishop g7, black has a very simple idea. Play f5 to kick the horse, and play rook d8 to pressure the pawn on d2. That is all that black is aiming for. There really is nothing else to consider in the position, and white has to come up with a way to combat that idea, and it's simply not easy to find moves. Now, you will notice that at this point, Levy is up in this position about 20 minutes on the clock. I do like that he used a bunch of time before taking, but his opponent here plays the great and very explosive move, pawn to c4, after a mere 1.5 minute thing. Now, this move is the best move in the position and is the only move to give black a significant advantage. Now, the reason it gives black a significant advantage is when we look at the position here. This bishop on f8 is walled in. This diagonal, nothing is happening. You could go to h6, for example, but still, you're staring at a pawn wall here, so there really are no ideas of how to activate the bishop. But when black goes c4, black now is going to play bishop c5, and suddenly the B's on the two diagonals become extremely dangerous. So, Levy plays move bishop takes bishop. If he were to take the pawn here, black actually is winning the game, because after bishop c5 check, king to g2, black can sack the rook. With rook takes bishop, knight takes rook, and after f5 here, you will lose the horse with the pin. You can still play d3, but after takes, and f5 here, black is simply opening up the diagonals, and black will win the game. So, Levy takes the bishop on b7, we get bishop c5 check, king g2, takes, king h3, and now we have the move queen d7 check being played. Here, Levy goes for f5, and this is a move that I really like here, because even though this isn't the top computer move, it forces black into a situation where black has to now come up with a plan. If white were to play a move like king g2, after takes, and rook d8, f5 here to stop knight e4, white is again on his back foot. The knight has no good squares in the center of the board, you can't go to d5 or e4, and black will tunnel on playing rook d8 and try to put pressure on the d file. So black has the easy idea, white struggles to have an idea, and for that reason, Levy will probably have to spend a lot of time and lose the game if this position occurs. So when Levy goes f5, I really like this decision because now the knight always has a home on e4. Black cannot push the pawn to f5 to cover the square, and even though black is better, it's going to require a lot of precise play from black here to prove an advantage. So we get takes. Now we have the move rook a d8 being played, and this is a mistake from Djurubek Kamrakulov, I should say. Sorry, I mispronounced the name. I just noticed it. Now, the reason this is a mistake is very nuanced and deep. If black were to trade the rooks on e1 here and play rook d8 in this position, After white goes rook to e2 here, and let's say black plays a move like b5, the rook on e2 is extremely passive. It's tied down, guarding this pawn on d2 from being captured, but you can't go to f2 either, because then you would hang the rook on the square. And what that means is that in this position, if white ever tries to go knight e4, you also always hang the pawn on f5. So the rook is super passive on e2 versus the game, as we're about to see, because when we get the move rook a d8 being played, Levy trades the towers, and now he goes rook f1, and suddenly when I saw this position, I started getting some hopes that Levy might even have a chance to win the game, because now the pendulum has shifted completely in the opposite direction, where Levy now has an obvious plan. What is that obvious plan? He wants to put this horse on e4 here and simply attack the pawn on f6 or the bishop on c5. Additionally, if we get a5, knight e4, the rook on f1 always guards his pawn on f5. So now the rook on f1 is perfectly placed. Additionally, you can even play a move like rook to f4 and rook g4 down the road. So now your rook is very active here, guarding the pawn and maybe going to the g or the h files. Whereas when I pull up that position after rook e2, give me 1 second, you'll notice that in this position, the pawn on f5 is always a weakness. Rook can't go over. Rook also can't access the 4th rank either. So it comes down to the placement of the rook. So in this position, we get rook f1 being played. Here we have the move bishop d4, and Levy finds the best move in the position, which is queen to d3. Here we get the move a5 being played by Jurabek, and now Levy plays move rook f4 after a long think. Now, at this point, Levy is only down a couple of minutes on the clock, but it's a very difficult situation here because you don't really know what you're playing for with the white pieces. The natural instinct here is to try and push everything towards the king side. Knight e4, for example, makes a lot of sense. Rook f4 makes a lot of sense. All these ideas of shifting to try and attack the black king make a lot of sense, but this is a situation where actually going for a kingside attack, or what's actually a phantom a kingside attack, simply is the wrong idea. What white should do here is play the move knight to b5, attacking this bishop, and after rook to d8, white should now play the move rook c1, shifting everything to the queen side. Now you're probably thinking, well, what's the point of this? The first obvious idea is that white wants to go rook to c7, trying to create the kebab on the 7th rank, and if black moves the bishop in what looks like a very natural move here, white will trade the queens and now play this very nasty move d4, getting rid of the weakness on d2. If black takes, there's now rook to d1, winning the bishop or the rook on the file. And if black moves the bishop to, let's say, b4, now after rook to c6, white is attacking both the pawns on f6 and b6 at the same time, and white has no chance of ever losing. White probably won't win the game, but there is zero risk. Instead, Levy decides to play the move rook f4, and after this move, things are starting to go downhill, because now, once again, we shift back in the other direction, where black's moves become a little bit too easy. And on top of that, Levy is already down nearly 8 minutes on the clock, so Kamarkulov plays rook d8 right away. Only move, of course, if you move the bishop, you simply lose the queen in the game. So we get rook d8 played instantly, and now Levy is under pressure on the clock, and black simply wants to move the bishop to e5 or c5 and infiltrate on the d file. So Levy goes for the move rook g4 here. This is a mistake, but at this point with such limited time on the clock, I don't really blame Levy. Computer still thinks after knight e2 and say bishop to c5. I guess you can go queen c3 and you're fine. If black goes bishop e5 here, I guess you check, and after king f8, you take and play d4, and maybe white is okay here, but frankly, if I look at this position with black having 2 pawns on the queen side versus the 1, and being down so much time on the clock, even if a computer would save the game, I think in human practice, black should win anyway. So Levy plays the move rook to g4 here, and now we get the move king to f8, which is the best move in the position, and we have the move queen to f3. Now, this is a mistake from Levy, but he's very low on time. No obvious idea. It's simply a lot to expect him to try and find the best move. And in fact, if you think about it from the computer's perspective, looking at the valuation bar, after knight to e2, which is the top move, let's just say bishop c5, takes, d4, and bishop b4, black is starting to push p on the queen side. Your knight is very passive. You have all these weak pawns, which can be targeted very easily. And again, I think that if I had this position with white, even against, say, like Magnus or another 2700 plus player, I probably would lose here with the white pieces. So I'm not really going to be too critical at this phase in the game when Levy plays queen f3. Unfortunately, in this position, we get bishop e5 being played very quickly by Jurabek Kamarkulov here. The problem is the move is too easy. It creates a nice wooden shield here, targeting everything and guarding the pawn, and it now opens up the d file for the double stack. And at this point, it's very clear that with Levy being down 5 minutes on the clock, no obvious plan, and the additional issue in the endgames with black having the outside pawns here on the queen side, he's probably going to lose. So Levy goes knight to e4 here, and now we get the move queen d3. Perfect move here. Black's trying to trade off the queens here and simply win the pawn on b3 and push p on the queen side and win the game. Levy plays the move queen d1, and now we get this move h5, another perfect computer move. If Black were to play rook d4, he's also winning, but h5 forces the rook to h4, and now after rook to d4, Levy's pieces are simply terribly placed. The knight on e4 is under attack. The pawn on f5 is hanging if you move the knight. There's also a queen f1 checkmate plan if you were to play like queen h5 after check, king g4, rook e4. This is GG, why not? So everything is falling apart here. Levy decides to play the move queen c1, I think with 5 seconds on the clock if I saw it correctly. But this is more or less the same as a resignation. Probably the last try was to play queen e1 guarding the knight here, but after say rook to b4, White's pieces are simply stuck. White is in a zugzwang here. Pawn on b3 is hanging, knight on e4 is weak, queen can't move, rook can't move, everything is tied down here with the weak pawn, weak king. White there are no redeeming qualities about this position, and White will lose no matter what he does. So, Levy plays the move queen to c1, and now we get rook takes knight. Levy plays rook takes pawn here. If Levy were to play the move queen c8 here, hoping for a miracle with king e7 and queen b7 here, winning the rook and creating the right triangle, he would actually be back in the game. He's not winning, it would be a draw, but he has chances. But if Black goes king g7 here, when you play the move rook takes pawn, trying to go for the classic b5, queen h8 checkmate here, winning the game. Unfortunately, Black has queen to f1 here, which checkmates the white king before you can checkmate on this back rank. So, after rook e4, we get rook takes h5, and here Djurabek Kamarkulov plays the move king g7, dodging the check and the mate on c8 and h8, and here Levy resigns the game, and Kamarkulov wins in the first round. Now, this game had a lot of topsy-turvy moments. I would say my biggest concern or issue with this game for Levy is that it felt like in the middle game, once he lost the thread, he used a little bit too much time. He wasn't really able to come up with the best plans. And I think that is more an issue, perhaps, of trying to play unfamiliar pawn structures and be enterprising. I probably would have recommended, if we go back just a little bit very briefly, to step back into the game for 1 second. Something a little bit different than f4, maybe knight e2 right away, maybe d4 as well. Something to create a more standard pawn structure where Levy would not have to spend as much time. Because once he goes for this whole f4 line, my general view is that the game was simply a little bit too easy for his opponent to play. The plans were easier for Black and much harder for Levy. Led him using a lot of time. He was in a difficult situation anyway, but I think that was the biggest reason he lost this game. So, Levy suffers a very tough loss in the first round of this New York Labor Day Invitational Tournament. It already seems pretty unlikely that he can make a Grandmaster norm in the tournament after the first round. I think he's going to need something like 7 points out of 8, if I'm not mistaken, to make a norm. So it's already unlikely, but as we saw with the last tournament he played in Italy, there's a long way to go, and he should take it game by game and see how he can do. So a tough loss against one of the top players in the event, if not the top player, but there's still 8 more rounds, so hopefully Levy will be able to recover from this. He plays 2 games tomorrow. We will obviously be doing some recaps, but I think that's going to be it for now with this game. So, on that note, if you've enjoyed this recap or you are not subscribed to my channel, make sure that you smash that subscribe button below, and we'll be back tomorrow with some more recaps as Levy continues his journey in this New York Labor Day Invitational Tournament in New York City. Hope you guys enjoyed the recap. Have a great rest of your evening, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.